So first of all, welcome to everyone to this side event at the Global Refugee Forum 2023. We are thrilled today to present to you a publication, our latest Policy Insights collection on refugee teachers, the heart of the global refugee response. And we are very pleased to have with us today some of the authors of the many contributions in that publication, and also to all of you in the room and all of you online. And first of all, we're very happy to welcome to the stage Martina Ramming, who is a senior policy advisor at the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency in the education unit. Martina, please.
NORRAG and Moira for organizing this side event at the Global Refugee Forum. And more importantly, I thank you for highlighting this that important topic of refugee teachers. Teachers of refugees and refugee teachers play a crucial role in providing education to refugee children and youth, and they are at the heart of the humanitarian response. Or as the teacher Stella yesterday said at the Education Campus panel on teachers in her video, what is education without teachers? I don't have to explain in this room, I think, how important education is for the millions of children and young people, refugees displaced in emergencies and protracted crises. I think, yeah, you are the expert here on that topic. For Switzerland, quality education for all, in particular in emergencies, is a priority, as it's defined in our international cooperation strategy and as well in the draft 2528, which has to be adopted by the parliament next year. We had our government re-elected this morning, so let's hope it will work as we... Here at the GRF, Switzerland reaffirmed its commitment to uphold this right to education, and we will do this by supporting partner countries in integrating refugee children and youth into the national education system, as well through our partnerships such as with the ECW or GPE or the Geneva Hub for Education in Emergency, and as well by fostering political dialogue on education and bringing forward vocational skills development in emergencies and innovative financing for education. And furthermore, we want to continue to promote International Geneva as a platform for education and education in emergency and intersectoral cooperation. And NORRAG here in Geneva is an important partner for SDC. It's based here in Geneva, but it's working through its network with the whole world. And it raises awareness for education, contributes to evidence-based policy decisions, and brings together academia, public and private sector, and humanitarian and development organizations working on education here in Geneva and around the globe. And which brings me back to the event here today. Refugee teachers are at the heart of global refugee response. However, they're often been overlooked. Their unique realities and needs in the classroom, but in terms of recognition or professional development and security, remains underserved and underaddressed, and their voices often not heard. This makes it even more important that NORRAG has brought together 48 authors from its networks of researchers, policymakers, and practitioners to critically reflect on the challenges facing refugee teachers, to showcase current evidence and offer policy directions to prioritize and protect the work and well-being of refugee teachers. GRF is the very right moment to bring the experts here and the teachers from various refugee-hosting contexts together and to discuss their vision for improved refugee teachers policy and practices. Many thanks to NORRAG, Moira and her team for that. And many thanks to the participants at this panel and to all the contributors to the publication for sharing their experience and knowledge with us. Maybe to conclude with Stella's call of yesterday, teaching is a passion, is a calling that needs support. She does her part, we have to do ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to the work of NORRAG, following on from what Martina has already told us about what it is that we do. So, the principle that underpins our work at NORRAG is what you see in the top right-hand corner there, which is to surface underrepresented knowledge and expertise, particularly from the Global South. And by doing that, we more effectively can then carry out our other actions, which are to share capacity, co-produce knowledge, and also broker policy dialogue. Without those underrepresented knowledges and expertise being represented, it is less effective, whatever else it is that you're trying to do in this space. And the reason why we do what we do is in order to allow our stakeholders then to be able to amplify what it is that they learn, and then access the appropriate knowledge that they need to know what it is that they need to know, even if they don't realize they need to know it, and then also to be able to act on that. And these are the 4 themes that we work in: data and evidence, education and the SDGs, innovations and disruptions, and private sector approaches, with an underpinning focus always on our network, our partnerships, and our learning and sustainability. And our work here today fits in with that education and the SDGs, humanitarian development, peace, nexus work that we do. So this is a quick overview of that network, as Martina said, representing a large number of academics and also many other sectors, 5,600 members in 179 countries around the world. And I'm very, very pleased to hand over directly to Chris Henderson, who is our Education and Emergency Specialist and is also the editor of this fantastic policy insights we're launching today. Over to you, Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Moira, and thank you, Martina, for your generous opening as well. As Moira said, my name is Chris Henderson, and it has been a privilege and an honour to bring together this publication, and the best part of it has been working with all the incredible authors that have brought their expertise to this work. So this publication has 48 authors who have contributed 28 papers. Those authors represent researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and we're really proud to say, in line with NORRAG's The South Also Knows initiative, that over 50% of the authors represent or are working in Global South contexts. And that was a real priority of ours from the very start. And as you'll see, when you're able to collect the publication on your way out, they have contributed tremendous knowledge and critical insight to the work. They represent over 15 contexts, and the publication itself is divided by 3 key themes that are familiar themes to anyone working with refugee teachers. So those themes are the inclusion of refugee teacher voices in policy making and practice, policies that address the challenges of teachers' work conditions and their well-being, and finally, the opportunities that are out there to improve refugee teacher professional development. So in putting this publication together at this time, in line with the Global Refugee Forum, it was our vision that this week and beyond, this compilation of papers really inform rigorous debate. They inspire key stakeholders to engage with and learn from refugee teachers, and to partner with those refugee teachers as professionals and to see them as transformative agents of change. So thank you all for being here, and thank you especially to all the authors that have made this publication possible. I'm really looking forward to the conversations we'll have today and hopefully the discussion that we get to have at the end. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the beautiful cover designed by Anouk Pasquier-Dio, who is here today as well. To really sort of be able to highlight the importance of this particular issue and topic. And fundamentally, these are the 3 main areas of the actual content of the briefing. which unfortunately the slide's not quite fitting in the right space, but we'll work in it. And the contributors to the publication, as Chris said, we are very grateful to all of them. And we're going to move now to one of our online contributors, Janaina Hirata Gadres, who is also going to be speaking with us for 5 minutes on her contribution about teachers' well-being with Hugo Ediberto Florido Mosquera. Bienvenidos, welcome, over to you.
Now, good to say good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and especially the colleagues from NORRAG who have put a special effort to bring all the authors together for this important publication. I am one of the authors, and I want to share with you today the impact on teachers' well-being in complex crises such as the case of Colombia. I will particularly share information on a work we have done to write the paper, which was based on a needs assessment on teachers' well-being and crisis context. We have introduced several teachers working in public schools in the outskirts of Bogota that received a considerable number of refugee and displaced children and adolescents. And honestly, teachers are one of the most resilient and professionals, and yet they're still humans and also vulnerable. During the process, we interviewed and heard more than 73 teachers that faced a lot of challenge, and then they also reflect on how the situation they were facing affect their well-being. Not surprisingly, one of the main effects on their well-being is connected on their capacity to support students and their learning process. So when they feel they're failing, or they feel they don't have the resources or the capacity to support the students, that's where they feel more affected in terms of their well-being, including mental health. That situation for an extended period can lead them to some more aggravated situations like burnout, and that's something that they were really concerned about. In the context of Colombia, we have a kind of a mixed complex crisis. So you have teachers who are dealing with a very vulnerable context, who also have to work with internal displacement, and now also work with displaced and refugee people that comes from Venezuela. Those children normally comes with short or long period, extended period without having access to education, and they require some special support like catch-up programs, psychosocial support, and the lack of capacity for teachers sometimes to deal with that put a bigger burden on their hands, and that affects their well-being. So one thing that we come out in terms of recommendations based on that is that the education policies should be more crisis sensitive, and that should allow funds to school that accommodate a significant number of asylum seekers or refugee children and adolescents. When you have this mobility of resource, you allow for education planning that can draw on past experience, but also can allocate resources on the schools that are working directly with that population. If you do the right allocation based on the teacher's need, then you can decrease the burden that they have, the stress, and that can also help in the inclusion process. And then a last point that I think is important is that we talk so much about how schools are healing places, so important for children and adolescents adaptation when they are in the mobility. But if teachers not well and not with their well-being like in a good place, how they're supposed to also promote the well-being of the students? So I'll leave that question and I'll pass to my colleague, Hugo Florido, who is a director of a school, a very special school in Colombia, for him to share a bit of his experience with us.
Buenos días. Yanaira, ¿puedo intervenir? Buenos días a todos y a todas. Les saludo desde Bogotá, capital de Colombia. Soy Hugo Florido, soy rector del Colegio República Bolivariana de Venezuela, una institución educativa distrital que desarrolla un proyecto político-pedagógico en torno al reconocimiento de la diversidad, no solamente de carácter funcional, sino de diversidad cultural y de diversidad política en el país. Es una institución que precisamente acoge niños migrantes venezolanos en todo el proceso de relaciones binacionales que hemos establecido desde el año 2016, producto precisamente de la diáspora y de la movilización que han tenido las familias desde nuestro país hermano. Asimismo, aparte de esa experiencia, llevo 30 años de experiencia en formación docente para la educación inicial, básica y media en nuestro país, en Colombia, y esto me ha permitido detectar algunos elementos clave sobre los cuales podrían hacerse recomendaciones en la formación docente y en la observación y reconocimiento docente para la atención de niños, niñas migrantes y específicamente población vulnerable asociado a niños y familias refugiadas. Con eso quiero contarles que la primera recomendación que yo haría para los países miembros de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas y de todos los organismos multilaterales consiste en reconocer que la migración es un derecho y es una realidad para los países de América Latina. Y esto nos pone en una necesidad fundante de activar procesos de formación docente en los cuales desde la formación inicial, pero también desde la formación postgradual, los profesores tengan la oportunidad de desarrollar ambientes de formación en donde se trabaje sobre interculturalidad, procesos de formación que tengan que ver con el reconocimiento, el derecho a la educación, procesos que tengan que ver con acogida, disminución de las barreras del aprendizaje para los niños, niñas y jóvenes que accedan a la escuela en territorios que no les son propios. Y otro elemento clave que tenemos para la formación docente es un reconocimiento del docente desde su nivel de diversidad, porque normalmente los docentes en América Latina se les tiene un reconocimiento de carácter técnico y hay que avanzar en procesos de reconocimiento de ese sujeto histórico que es el profesor, en esa tríada que podría denominarse de su conocimiento profesional docente, que no es suficiente con ese reconocimiento de su saber del área o del área o de la disciplina específica, ese saber pedagógico didáctico, sino reconocimiento de un saber histórico que lo posiciona precisamente como un sujeto diverso y que en ese reconocimiento de la diversidad puede establecer relaciones de reconocimiento de la diversidad de los otros. ¿Quiénes son esos otros? Los niños, las niñas y los jóvenes que requieren de un reconocimiento de sujetos diversos para atender sus necesidades propias como niños migrantes. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Hugo Heriberto. Muchas gracias, Hugo Heriberto. Fue muy importante que usted esté con nosotros. Right, and we're now going to pass on to the next contributor, Francis Bizoza Bigirimana, who's going to tell us about strengthening teacher professional development in refugee contexts in Uganda, with Felician. Okay, with another teacher that he has also been able to mobilize for this event. Thank you. Francis, over to you.
Okay, so thank you so much. I am a teacher in Uganda and later I've been doing a lot of professional development and working in refugee settlements. And I'm happy to note that right now I'm doing this call in a refugee settlement called Changwali, where I have a colleague teacher with me who is teaching in Changwali settlement. Those of you who will have a chance to read the paper, the policy insight will have contributed to, and you realize that according to the Uganda's second education response plan for refugees and host communities in Uganda, 2021, 2022 to 2025, over 1.53 million refugees and asylum seekers call Uganda home. And nearly 60% of this population are children. And that means having this part of the population being children, there is need for education, there is need for more teachers in the settlements. And the distribution of schools in the settlements is limited. And finding that there are very few refugees teachers in this context, yet the biggest population of these schools in the settlements is refugee children. It puts them at stake because they come with a different cultural setting from their original homes, with the different languages. And that means if we are to give them enough support in the schools for them to be able to receive quality education, there is need to have refugee teachers in these schools, because these refugee teachers understand the cultural context, they understand the backgrounds where these children come from. And what does this require us to do as host community people, as stakeholders who are intervening in supporting the refugees in our countries? One is that we need to look at how we ensure that these refugee teachers are prepared to fit into the education system of the country that they are in, and also support them to be able to familiarize with the curriculum, and also because they stand in the middle as go-between between the refugee children, the schools, and the national teachers. So drawing upon my hands-on experience from a project that I have just been working on at Learning Equality, where I do curriculum development, and the project is called Flying Colors Program, where we implemented a curriculum of out of school refugee and host community children who had dropped out of school at during the COVID-19 pandemic, but when schools opened, they couldn't come. So we put together a program that would enhance their skills, a branded program that brought together content, curriculum content, social emotional learning, and technology for them to be attracted back to school. And one of the key things, and I want to outline a pivotal on this policy, is that the insights that can greatly enhance professional development of refugee teachers should have a specific focus on the requirements of pre-service and in-service training, especially to help the teachers to bring them to speed, to get to familiarize with the national or the local curriculum requirements. And we understand, for example, the education ministries for the different contexts or different countries, where these teachers are established, need to recognize their qualifications and prior experience of the refugee teachers. In other words, there is need for support to validate their qualifications and their documents for them to be assumed into the national system. And I don't want to talk a lot because I have a teacher with me who has been through this process, who understands better because they have gone through this experience. I will take a chance to welcome Pasco to share with us, him being a refugee teacher in Changwali Secondary School. Please, Pasco, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Francis, to welcome me. And thank you, all of you, my colleagues who are following me.
Speak loud.
My name is Pasco. I'm a refugee from Congo, and I'm now a refugee teacher in Changwal refugee settlement. And I'm teaching at Changwal SS, Changwal Secondary School. I'm a teacher of ICT. The challenge that we are going through, the major challenge is that we are working, we are professional, and we work hard to be professional teachers. We are qualified, we are working well, but our qualification, it is not being recognized by the government. We are working as volunteers, we are working without payment, we are going through different challenges. Our documents are not we need the equivalent document to go to the payload of government, but the government and the government organization, they are not working on that issue. So for me, I can request for the government and the government organization to work on our issue as to improve the teaching and learning process. Thank you.
So, like he has noted, I had a conversation just slightly before the call started, and was telling me that one of the things that the teachers, refugee teachers, bring on board in these schools is that sometimes you find, because there is challenges of language barrier, we have these learners who are in these schools, but probably they don't understand the language and they have not yet fully integrated into the community. There is always a big challenge between the learners and the national teachers. And when he got into Changwali Secondary School, one of the roles he plays most is to be an intermediary between these learners and the teachers, to help do translation and to help the teachers, the national teachers, understand the behaviors and the contexts where these children are coming from, so that they are able to handle them, and also to ensure that there is support for the children's well-being in these schools, so that they are heard, they are understood, they are not taken as misbehaving, but the national teachers are patient with them to understand the backgrounds they are coming from, to understand how they have been traumatized, so that there is well-being for them in the schools. For that's what we can really say, and that's the experience that is happening here in Uganda and in the different refugee settlements. And one of the appeals that another teacher I heard from is that, for example, for a refugee teacher to validate their documents at the national level, to fit the Uganda national level, they need about $1,200 to validate this. And this is money that refugees don't have. So one of his requests was that if the stakeholders and NGOs can help them to finance the validation for their documents, that would be great for them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francis. And also, Pasco, for taking time out of your very busy and essential work to be with us today. And now I'd like to hand over to Katja Hinz from UNESCO IED and Helen West from EDT to tell us about their contribution.
Yeah, this is working? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much also for the honor to publish alongside all these authors in this NORRAG issue, and for the invitation to speak today. The contribution that Helen and I did for the NORRAG issue is based on a multi-year, and I don't know if there's a presentation. Yeah. Great. Okay. Perfect. Is based on a multi-year, multi-country research project that EDT and IEP embarked on collaboratively with the support from Dubai Cares. This project was based on or developed because of a literature review that we did, and where we found out, I think it was in 2017-18, that very little is known of who is actually teaching in refugee settings and how these teachers are managed. So to fill this gap, we embarked on this research journey and looked at who is teaching in these settings and at the primary level, and what promising policies and practices exist, and what areas there are to develop more strengthened teacher management in these settings. So based on a review of key documents on teacher management, we identified 3 dimensions of teacher management that are key to the motivation, retention, and teaching quality. These areas are, the first area is recruitment and deployment. The second one is professional development. And then the third is job conditions, including, for example, questions around career path. The research took place in 4 countries, namely in Jordan. In Jordan, we looked at UNRWA schools where Palestinian refugees are taught, and then we looked at schools where Syrian refugees are taught. We also went to Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda to analyze teacher management in these countries. For all of these countries, we published country reports and short policy briefs that put forward concrete recommendations how teacher management can be strengthened in refugee settings, of course, taking into account the very specific realities in the different countries. We also developed 3 short documentary films on teacher management in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda, together with teachers that are really taking us through their day and showing us the challenges and what are the motivating factors for them to keep teaching in these very challenging settings. And before I hand over to Helen to share a few insights on what is key for inclusive teacher development policies in refugee settings, I just wanted to highlight that we just published our report on Uganda. That's the last country case study. So it was great to hear from Francis and Pasco before. These issues are also discussed in that report. And if you're interested, I think someone will post a link. You can access these publication and videos. Okay, Helen, over to you.
Great, thank you, Katia. So I'm just going to give a quick summary of our article, which was it's about paving the way for inclusive teacher professional development in refugee contexts, and it's a range of enabling factors that we identified. So the first one that we've got is actively supporting refugees and those from host communities to access pre-service education. And this, I think, speaks to what Francis was saying a bit as well, on a bit of a different issue, but it's very much about the practical barriers that still exist, that in a lot of the contexts that we looked at, refugees are able to attend a national teacher training college, but the reality can be very different. So if you're in a camp setting, for example, it might be that you need a freedom of movement pass to exit, which can be quite tricky to obtain. If you're going to attend a teacher training college, they're often not in and around the camp settings. You might be in quite a rural location, even if you're not in a camp setting. And so in order to attend teacher training college, you might need the finance, you might need to be able to pay to get there, to pay for the course, for your living day-to-day cost. And so it's very much about actively enabling the policies to be activated in a way, that these barriers still exist. And even though it's not about changing a policy, it is about supporting refugees to really help them to become qualified if that's relevant to them. And then the next one is about including teachers working in camp settings in the national provision of in-service teacher professional development. So here it's relevant to both national and refugee teachers. In camp settings, it's often the case that if a school is run by an education partner, essentially even for national teachers, you might be leaving the national system and you no longer have access to that national level professional development. And so enabling refugee and national teachers to continue to access the professional development that all other teachers in government schools in the country are currently getting. It means that they receive training in the right areas that have been identified by the government. It means that the government could be assured that the training that they're receiving is of a particular standard in the right area. And as inclusion progresses more, it means that the teachers are being prepared to participate in a fully government-led system once their camp setting is no longer in action. And then if we move on, we have providing education partners with clear guidance to enable them to support the implementation of national teacher professional development priorities. So we know that education partners are key to the provision of professional development. They will likely continue to be key in the future, even with inclusion. They are often operating in the more challenging, more isolated rural settings. They have the funding to support the hardest to reach and the most vulnerable teachers. So what we want to do is move towards the reality where all of these teacher professional development programs are supporting government priorities. And for that, we need strong national leadership and clear communication and guidance by the government, which means that approved courses can be rolled out to all teachers and the education partners are all on the same page in terms of delivering what the government deems to be a priority.
Thank you so much for that. Really important insights for this publication and taking your work forward into policy and practice. And next, we're very happy to have Becky Telford, who is the Chief of Education at UNHCR, to tell us about her contribution as well.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much, Chris and NORRAG, for the engagement and the publication. And also we're very excited to be here around the Global Refugee Forum 2023, coming fresh and late from a really critical session on that. So I wanted to share just some insights from UNHCR's forthcoming publication around the typology of teachers, which covers 16 countries and then has in-depth case studies from Uganda, Chad and Malaysia. And the typology of teachers really tries to look at this continuum across being, a refugee incentive teacher who is untrained all the way through to a trained, fully paid, embedded national teacher, because the solutions and things we need to put into place for people in those different levels do look very different. I think in recent years, we've seen this huge push for inclusion in national systems. We've talked about it here, and I think that's been a real benefit. It's recognised as the most scalable way of accessing quality education. But I think teachers and refugee teachers in particular are kind of woefully overlooked within that. And this has been coming up increasingly in conversation, which I think is incredibly helpful. I do recognise that as 75% of refugees are hosted in low middle income countries who have significant challenges, many of those apply to teachers as well. But I wanted to focus on a piece that came out of the study as a common issue across every single country, and this will be a massive surprise to everyone. Low and irregular payment disincentivizes teachers. So it's not just about fairness. I mean, it affects teacher motivation. We have massive attrition, which also means that the input around professional development, mentoring, support, language, everything, if you have to do it again and again, year on year, because teachers leave, it's also a kind of efficiency issue around where we can and do spend money in the system. Teachers themselves really recognize it. And I think, we see the main issue is around coming together to recognize that teachers need to be paid, and then who pays for it. And where we're particularly working towards inclusion in national systems, there is a reluctance for anyone to step in because it's a recurrent cost. It is a massive gap. So you might have funding for a couple of years from a humanitarian agency, then there's an expectation that government will take it on. But the stretch for particularly unqualified teachers, where teachers do not have the right to work, they do not have freedom of movement, there is a gap. And there is a lack of willingness to really understand what that gap looks like and lean into it. We have lots of people doing incredible work within the donor community. But this is it's a mind blank for so many donors. I was in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya with a number of fabulous donors who do really, really great work. And they went to speak to teachers and they were saying, really working on well-being, holistic well-being of teachers. Can you please tell us what you want? And the teacher said, lunch. Because he couldn't afford it. They do not get rations, food rations, school feeding. They cannot afford to buy their own food because they're on a minimal incentive wage and they live too far from home to go home. So I think nuts and bolts, when we really get down to it, predictable, sustainable, multi-year financing mechanisms for teacher salaries, recognizing it might take a while, right, to move into some of these areas are critical, because the other thing that it does is it means that refugee children grow up not wanting to be teachers themselves either. And we're in a global teacher shortage. So it means that we're kind of looking not just at people now, but the next generation. The other piece to touch on is the certification, recognition and prior qualification, as Francis and Paco talked about. And that is also really important. It's something which needs to be done context by context to look at equivalency. Getting equivalency if you're a refugee teacher going from Uganda to Kenya is a very different thing from if you're going to DRC to Uganda, right? And so looking at not just equivalency, but how do we conceive of genuinely investing in refugee teachers and making sure that that plan is done around movements within the national system. So Uganda, for example, is moving to expecting all teachers to have a graduate degree, an undergraduate degree, within 10 years. So it's not just preparing teachers for now, it's preparing teachers for later and looking at what that is to the system. So I think the main thing for me is recognizing how incredibly hard refugee teachers work. I think like many teachers, they're also social workers. During COVID, they were healthcare workers, nurses, people taking temperatures, but they're also translators, facilitators, protection officers, right? The very least that we can do, aside from try and support them to actually build a feature that they can use in their host country, or if they return home to build that next generation, is to pay them properly. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Becky. Refugee teachers have the same needs that we do. So, from that, what we want to do in terms of these contributions is to put them also into a broader context. And so we have two speakers who are experts in teachers more broadly, and we will hear from them now. First of all, we have Carlos Vargas Tamés, who is the Chief of Secretariat for the UNESCO International Teacher Task Force for Education 2030. Carlos, bienvenido.
Muchas gracias, Moira, and hello to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. I will speak in English, given the artificial intelligence subtitles that are having in the room, if that's okay with you. So thank you very much for your kind invitation. It is a pleasure to join. I wish I could have made it to Geneva, but the agenda was rather pressing. Nonetheless, very happy for the technologies, if not for the subtitles, for the possibility of joining you remotely. What I've heard so far in terms of the challenges and the needs of support of refugee teachers, of teachers in emergency situations, is very much what I wanted to share. So I'm very happy that I only have 5 minutes, because a lot has been said in terms of the challenges, and also in terms of the policy insights, which I believe will be. I mean, they come in a very timely moment when we are looking at what are the global challenges for teachers coming out of the Transforming Education Summit. Of course, there is a set of recommendations by a high-level panel on the teaching profession, and I think these recommendations and these challenges materialize in a very different way when it comes to refugee teachers and teachers in emergencies. I would not like to reiterate a lot of the things that were mentioned in terms of the contractual situation, in terms of payment, in terms of the support and the professional development, the RVA systems, recognition of prior learning, certification of teachers, and so on. We have published a few documents I'll be able to share in the chat when I'm done with my presentation. Many of them together with the people you have around the table. So with the IIEP, we published last year a module of the Teacher Policy Development Guide, which focuses particularly on the management of refugee teachers and teachers in emergencies. So thank you to our colleagues in the IIEP. We've been working with Chris as well for a contribution to the global report on teachers, which will be presented in February 2024 at the Policy Dialogue Forum of the TTF in Johannesburg from 26 to 29 February. But maybe I would like to stop there on some of the content of the global report, because it has a lot to say in terms of refugees, apart from the contributions that you will see in the report, and that we will invite you to read the report, but also to read a summary, which we call highlights of the global report on teachers that were published on the 8th of November during UNESCO's General Conference. And then that is online. I will share the link, and then to look at the complete report, which will be launched, as we said, in February. Just a word on the global report on teachers, which has been produced by UNESCO and the Teacher Task Force, will be the first dedicated global report exclusively to examine data on teachers, challenges, case studies, recommendations, policy solutions. We're looking at promising practices, both from governments and development partners, NGOs, so that we can actually shed some light on what are some of the solutions to the challenges that we're hearing today, and what is the feasibility of putting them together. Now, the report will be published every 2 years, and this first edition will focus on teacher shortages. We will be monitoring SDG 4.C, the target dedicated to teachers, to see how countries are moving towards the goal of qualified teachers for everybody and in every classroom. And every 2 years, we will have a particular topic that we will focus on. As I said, this year, and the one that will be published in 2024 is on teacher shortages. Now, we address the issue as a global and multidimensional phenomenon that affects teachers throughout the world, regardless of income level. regardless of areas, and we look at the lack of teachers, of qualified teachers, but also we delve into what are some of the causes for that shortage. So of course, we look at teacher attrition. Of course, working conditions are very tied to this, and just to share a couple of figures with you, we have found out, for example, that teacher attrition has doubled between primary teachers between 2015 and 2022. So teachers are leaving the profession within the first 5 years and very rapidly. And this varies, of course, regionally. Nonetheless, we wanted to underline with this report, and that is the case, that the issue of teacher shortages is actually a global issue. Now, the issue of teacher shortages, the causes for it, and thus the policy solutions that can be envisioned differ by region. They are, they depend, of course, on political, social, and cultural contexts, but there are nonetheless certain conditions which remain valid to teachers and teaching throughout the world. One of them, of course, has to do with the working conditions of teachers. There's a colleague of mine which I like to quote often, who says that the working conditions of teachers are the learning conditions of students, and that pretty much encapsulates let's say the support that we want to give to teachers and the priority that we pay actually on education. Now, as we said, shortages differ around the world. And if one looks at, for example, different subject matter areas, we'll find that there's shortages for certain areas, while not for others. We have coexisting shortages in certain areas, plus surpluses in others. There is definitely an issue of diversity. That's something that was mentioned before by the colleagues in Colombia, for example.
Apologies, Carlos. Could I ask you to wrap up, please?
Indeed.
Thank you.
We do see, for example, that the diversity of the community is not represented in the workforce. So ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity, in terms of cultural diversity, sexual diversity, etc., is something that we need to look at. And just to wrap up, Moira, in terms of geographies, the issue of context, of course, of teachers in emergencies and refugee teachers is very, very important. So there, special emphasis needs to be done on the kind of remuneration. It's been said how you actually transit contract teachers to fixed term public servant positions. What role do qualification frameworks, recognition and validation, accreditation of this? As you know, UNESCO has finally established a qualification passport. So we're looking into the way of having a qualification passport for teachers too, in this particular context. So just to say, of course, global challenges teacher challenges is a global phenomenon, but we would like to have particular policy solutions that are tailored to every situation. So in that respect, for teachers in emergency situations, for refugee teachers, these particular policy insights will feature into the report, as they actually also encapsulate some of the recommendations that we want to see. So I'll stop right there. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And now to our final speaker on this particular part of it, Sonia Grick from Education International.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to share insights from the paper that our General Secretary David Edwards authored in this very important publication on the value of teacher voices. It's always hard to come at the end of a line of speakers. So we've heard that teachers are often overlooked in education responses in refugee settings. We've heard that we have a global teacher shortage. So I'm not going to repeat all of this. Just to say today, my key message would be that trade unions and the global education union movement has a key role to play. So as we move into including teachers in responses in crisis and refugee settings, the importance of working with unions to make sure that their voices are brought to the conversation through social and policy dialogue. Education International is the global union federation of teachers and education personnel. Through our 383 member organizations in 178 countries, we represent 32.5 million workers in education. And we are leading the Global Refugee Forum Education Alliance as Team on Teachers. And we are the voice of teachers on the global scene. And I just want to share here a few examples of the work that unions have been doing to support refugee education, and specifically in contexts where they were able to make a difference for refugee educators as well. First of all, let me stress that unions need to be seen as partners in refugee education responses. They have resources, experience, and a track record of handling the issues and challenges that refugee teachers face. And through social and policy dialogue and collective bargaining, we can address and solve some of these issues. And there are several contexts where trade unions have made a great difference for refugee teachers. The survey that Becky just mentioned revealed that in countries like Cameroon, Chad, Malawi, Pakistan, Uganda, and Syria, trade unions have been instrumental to safeguarding teachers' rights and ensuring timely remuneration and prioritizing teacher welfare. In Uganda, we heard before from Francis and his colleague Pasco. Our affiliates, the Uganda National Teacher Unions, has been working with teachers, learners, and other stakeholders to address the lack of uniformity in employment leading to teacher exploitation and precarious employment. And they advocated for a one-stop center handling all matters related to recruitment, deployment, confirmation, and discipline. And earlier you cited Stella, who unfortunately is not with us in Geneva this time, but she's a member of FUNATU, and we're very proud of having her as a spokesperson for this very important work that they are doing in Uganda. Unions have a crucial role to play across the board, from understanding the barriers, formulating solutions that will be different in every context, and also contributing to implementing them, but also monitoring the situation on the ground and holding governments accountable. And without a clear understanding of what is happening on the ground from the voice of the profession, sustainable solutions are likely to be realized. And I wanted to bring here the example of Lebanon, where our affiliates were instrumental in identifying and overcoming the barriers preventing teachers from receiving adequate and timely remuneration, which is a huge issue in crisis settings. Strong education unions can also promote social cohesion, solidarity, equity, and peer learning among refugee and host community teachers. And that's really important as we work to also make sure that education responses in refugee settings benefit the hosting communities. And in countries like Germany and Sweden, our members have been advocating for the rights of refugee teachers and assisted Syrian teachers, for example, in building community connections and continuing their career in the host country. And most recently, our members have been working to support Ukrainian educators to work in their host countries. For example, in Poland, our members at NP has hired a dedicated staff to provide information to Ukrainian educators and help them get information about access to the labor market. The Chisinau branch of our members in Moldova collaborated with the municipality around a mechanism to identify refugee teachers' qualifications and Russian-speaking teaching and non-teaching vacancies to facilitate the employment of Ukrainian educators. So these examples just show that teachers are key for policymakers, and they're not only the eyes and the ears of what's happening on the ground, but also those tasked with implementing any decisions that will be made in relation to teachers. And Education International, as the global voice of teachers worldwide, is committed to working with all partners to make sure that we collectively advance the rights and conditions of teachers in refugee and crisis settings. As part of our pledge at the Global Refugee Forum, we will advocate for the establishment of an international financing mechanism to provide bridge funding for teacher salaries in crisis settings. Becky powerfully spoke about this problem, so I'm not going to say more, but this is very important. And we have a flagship campaign, Go Public, Fund Education, and we will work under this campaign to make sure that we raise awareness about the needs for donors to come in and support teacher salaries when needed. And we will collaborate with our member organizations to support their engagement in policy and social dialogue in countries implementing strategies for inclusion and facilitate peer learning amongst member organizations in countries facing large influx of refugees. So through Education International, the education trade union movement, as Stella would say, is playing its part. And so we're really much looking forward to working with others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And now we're very honored to have Farida Shahid, who's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to education, as a discussant responding to the issues that have been raised. Farida.
Thank you. And it's a great pleasure to be here and an honor. I'm so happy that you have taken up this issue. Martina started off by saying, sorry, where's my notes? I've left them fallen. Martina started off saying, what is education without teachers? And it's absolutely true. And therefore, my first report I wrote on the state of education, the first thematic was on teachers, because I think we expect teachers to pivot to all of the environmental changes. We expect them suddenly to be digitally savvy. We expect them to be able to respond and continue during emergencies, and refugees and migrants as part of that emergency. We don't do anything for the teachers, and the teachers need to be supported, absolutely, as you've said throughout. And I agree that it's not just refugee teachers. Until we value teachers as a whole, you are not going to get the attention on refugee teachers that you really need. So the strange thing about education is that everybody agrees. Nobody's going to tell you we don't need education or education is bad. It's one of those human rights that everyone agrees on. On the other hand, the implementation and financial investment in that education, which is the investment for the future of the world and for our children, is not there. And I think there's a huge imbalance between what we are saying and what we're actually financing in terms of making sure this works. So we've already spoken about the teacher shortage, which is, of course, international and not just limited to persons in the refugee communities. But I held on Friday, it was also the 25th anniversary of the education mandate. So we held a meeting and all the speakers were Gen Zers. So we wanted to hear from the younger generation. And one of them said, to become educated is to be empowered. So for them, it's still very important. And yet we had SK, who is an Afghan refugee who left alone from Afghanistan at the age of 14. And for 2 years, he went from pillar to post. He had no one to help him. He had no one to give him education. And so he lost out for 2 years. So we asked him, he had no language and he didn't. So where is his education? How did he then eventually got asylum status in Belgium? But he said, I learned from Google. Now tell me, do we really want our children to be educated by Google? And what were the values and what are we teaching them? I mean, he's a very bright young man and therefore he's made a life for himself, but so many others. We also asked him what were the sources of support to these young women and men who fought and managed to get education. He said, no one. I didn't have anyone to go to because everyone else went home to their parents. I didn't have parents to go home to. And when we asked the teachers to help us, they said, we're too busy. Our time is over. We have other things to do. So absolutely, the teachers and the students and the refugee children both need to be provided support for their well-being first. and to have a safe environment in which they can grow. And so I think emergencies are fairly similar in the impact, not exactly, but they do. And for instance, in Pakistan, I know we had this enormous earthquake. Many schools were affected, many teachers were affected. But when we spoke to the teachers, nobody had given them any time to talk about the trauma that they went through. They were expected to just continue. And I'm sure all the refugee teachers that you've been talked about, you're relocated, and the push is to teach the children. The push is not, what do you need in order to be able to give the best education and the best environment? And we've already heard, I think, about how schools have not, and COVID especially, but otherwise too, schools are not just a place for learning and lessons. It's a place for social gatherings. They can really help you. And I'm very worried about the digital, but it hasn't been spoken about here. And presumably refugee communities are excluded from the digital, which is another problem. But the digital world is really not the panacea to everything. It has huge problems of data mining and privacy, which need to be looked at. I think also diversity was spoken about, and I think it's absolutely crucial. You want people who are dislocated for whatever reason to be able to continue with their own cultural heritage, but you also want them to understand where they are and have that. But that's not all. I find it very problematic when we say, okay, these are the refugees, let them learn their language, let them learn their culture. But the majority population is not taught about them. So you have a unidimensional thing, and they're all become little ghettos. We want the teachers, and when you're talking about teachers, I'm presuming one of the big issues, which I'm sure you've written about in one of these things, is how do you get them to interact? And perhaps the trade unions are, and the professional associations can. I'm not so sure. I think it's a great partnership we have with Education International. But I'm saying, I wonder if all the teachers in the national mainstream education are happy about refugee teachers. I think there are tensions, and I think you can't solve a problem unless we put it on the table. And so those tensions, and maybe the professional organizations, but also others, is what you need to negotiate through this so that there's an understanding on both sides that we're all working for teachers. We've spoken about integration in mainstream. So I think in terms of equivalences, I thought UNESCO was working on this. And I have taken it up with UNESCO that you have huge problems of equivalencies, of assessments, of why are we not valuing this? And if they are teaching, they need to have an approval. Sorry, unfortunately today, you still need a stamp that says you are a teacher, a stamp that says you are entitled to various things as teachers. And I think I would say, UNESCO's, I like the Futures of Education, the Commission report. And I think one of the things that it says, two things, both essential as we go forward for refugee teachers, for all teachers, is that education is a lifelong learning process. And lifelong means for teachers also, for regular teachers, for refugee teachers, for anyone. And that it is a public and common good. So I just want to stress here, I worry about the private sector and it's taking over or coming into, I know they help, which is great, but at the end of the day, education must be the responsibility of states. And I think all states need to come together to find a solution. And in that, I want to point out that in terms of finance, another issue, which I'm sure will will impact refugee teachers as it impacts all teachers. As you said, a lot of the refugees are in the developing countries. They're not in the developed countries. They have, a lot of them experience austerity measures. And what happens when you're forced to go into austerity measures? Two things are immediately impacted: health and education. That means salaries. That is the biggest cost of education, the salaries of teachers, and they're the ones that get cut. And of course, of health workers. So I think the idea of an international financial mechanism that would support teachers is absolutely fabulous. I think I'm going to end there and let you continue with the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Farida. And on the back of all of these very inspiring but sometimes difficult to hear presentations, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you have here in the room. Do just put your hand up. You need to get microphones. Who's going to break the ice with a question? Or do we have a question online, Simon? Everyone's blown away by the presentations. Please. Okay, first Farida, and then we'll take you, sir.
The question online, okay. Responsibility.
Can you speak loudly? And then I can repeat it?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Okay, I think the mic is ready. I just want to raise a couple of questions and information. The question is to the Ugandan presenter, the Ugandan teacher. My name is Kabir Kasa. I'm from IGAD and from Eastern and Horn of Africa region. So I'm asking Francis if he is aware of the teacher training program that we conducted in Uganda in a refugee setting for refugee teachers in the secondary school. If he's aware of that, then I have a follow-up question. Number two, I think when it comes to incentive and salary, it's really a major problem because countries cannot afford to even help their teachers, the mainstream teachers, for the larger population. And when it comes to refugees, I think some refugee teachers are very well paid, relatively from the local teachers or the national teachers. And now I think this gap, how can we bridge this gap between the refugee teachers and the national teachers? I think these are my questions. But on information, I think Francis may agree with me or not. We have trained teachers in our country, and because we are implementing the Djibouti Declaration, we focus on teacher development. That's number one. On qualification, you are right, there is this problem of qualification and also recognition. IGAD has developed the regional qualification framework. In fact, we are also advocating for the countries to implement the UNESCO qualification passport. Thanks to UNESCO, they have helped us to develop that regional framework. It's left with the adoption by the minister. Maybe it is happening early next year in February or March. Then once we have that adopted, then countries have obligation to implement and recognize the certificates of teachers. And I think we will be closer to solving. Uganda, for example, is now starting tomorrow stakeholder consultation on qualification framework, a comprehensive one that will include refugees and also the other students in the national setup. So I think these are my information. Thank you. Otherwise, I'm thrilled about the event today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Simon or Jackie, could you just pick up the microphone? Thank you. And thank you for that information and that important example from Uganda and East Africa region, where we can see that there is being progress made, even if it's not there today, it is going to be coming through. Any answers on the question about the differences between host community conditions and refugee conditions? Because there is variety both within each of the groups and also between them.
Please. Okay. I think you're looking at me anyway. It really differs in different areas. But I think firstly, I want to recognise the work of IGAD, and the regional qualifications framework is exactly the kind of thing which will make a difference. So the UNESCO qualifications passport is extremely helpful in many locations. It's very context specific, and it also links to the specific refugee countries of origin. But for IGAD as a regional platform, there's a huge opportunity that I think also looks at, it's not just refugees who move between IGAD countries, right? You have economic migrants, you have people who are just moving because it's the region. East African Community also works on equivalency at a lower level. And I think those solutions are extremely helpful because they're also owned in a very particular way. In terms of salary scales, I think there's a general perception that refugees are often paid more than national teachers, and it is true in some places. Uganda, there was a bit of a challenge around how people were paid, but it was also recognizing that there was essentially a markup to go to places that people didn't want to go to. So there were salary payments, then there were things like accommodation, transport, there were allowances to incentivize. So the payment as a whole was higher. And I would say, there are very different country level policies, as you know better than I do, around distribution of teachers and at what point you can insist that a teacher in the national system moves to an area. But most refugees are hosted in very marginalized areas. So they are places which are already under supported by teachers. And so those markups are sometimes paid. And frankly, they deserve them. I mean, I was in Dadaab when the teacher accommodation was burst into by Al-Shabaab and they got shot. So it's a real markup, right? There has been a huge movement around harmonizing teacher salaries. And this is also the note on education partners. If you're in a place where not just there is a difference between refugee and national teachers, but depending on your agency as well, right? So each partner pays differently. It also speaks to attrition. So people move around depending on what payment looks like. And under government leadership in Uganda, for example, we've harmonized refugee teacher payments. So they are the same as nationals. The only thing I would say is they're harmonized so they're the same as nationals, but those teachers do not have access to pension, social security, health insurance. They are not able, because they're not qualified and in the national system, they're not able to move up from step one because they're excluded from the professional development approach. So I agree with you. There are some challenges, definitely. And I think when we look at social cohesion, fairness, engagement with unions, really understanding, what did you call it? It's brilliant. Social and policy shifts, right? Looking at what that means between national and refugee teachers, we need to be better. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And a brief comment from Carlos?
Thank you, Moira. And just to follow up on Becky and the comment that was made about qualifications, we've seen a number of examples that actually tie remuneration, compensation to qualifications. So I believe, and I'm glad it's been mentioned, the issue of tying the issue of qualification frameworks in the different forms by means of RBA, RPL, the qualification passport certainly is important, so that the recognition of teachers as such can be accompanied by an equal pay, equal remuneration. But just to say that sometimes beyond remuneration, of course, there's working conditions. There's enabling better working conditions, like hosting and housing and transport and workloads and material conditions for learning, which are very, very important beyond the qualifications. And just one word on the issue of qualification frameworks, and one plea indeed would be for countries to actually ratify the Global Convention on the recognition of higher education diplomas. This would be one step forward to free movement, and it is what the passport is trying to do now, but at a global level. I think in as much as we have the recognition and the agreement of what a teacher is supposed to do, it also adds up to the status of teachers, to the status of the profession. So just that to say, it is important to tie the issue of remuneration with the qualification frameworks, possibly with a career structure for status, for recognition, for remuneration. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And certainly we have also a question in the online community watching this, asking about what else can be done to address high teacher turnover. And I think there are many solutions that have been addressed so far in the panel and also available in the publication, and that will be available at the end of this event. And certainly the question also in the online section, which is asking about responsibility sharing in refugee contexts, and how do we actually make sure that there's the responsibility sharing between host governments and donors, etc. And with 9 minutes left, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Judith Herbertson, Head of Girls Education at FCDO, to press the button, please. Not really, virtually.
I was going to say that wasn't in my brief. Good afternoon. It's been such a pleasure to be with you here today. We know that teachers are the bedrock of any education system. You don't need me to say this. They have the power and the responsibility to change lives, sometimes every 40 minutes, but particularly for those children and young people who do not benefit from stability and structure in their lives and who may be traumatized beyond what they should have to bear at their age. We're in this room. We must all have seen those children and those young people. And when teachers become refugees themselves, they face yet a more complex additional set of responsibilities, meeting, yes, the educational, but also the social, plus the psychological needs of the children and young people, as well as managing their own personal challenges, including often the futures of their own children. A very tough set of decisions that they face about how they maintain their alliance with their own professional commitment or take other avenues. And we very much therefore welcome the report from NORRAG highlighting the critical role that these refugee teachers will play. And I've learned an enormous amount listening to the experts in the room here today, one of which I am not. The UK is fully committed, however, to supporting the inclusion of refugee children and youth into national education systems. We were there at the birth of this concept when we held an event at Wilton Park out in the south countryside of England to think through how we could arrive here today with something tangible as a goal that we could all sign up to. And you will see our co-sponsorship of the Global Refugee Forum Education Mega Pledge, I hope, as part of our demonstrable commitment to this. We've been working very hard with UNHCR, principally Becky, the bank, and many others to reach this point. And I think it does provide a really strong vision for what we collectively can move towards. But the implementation will require us to harness the capacities of both refugee and host community teachers and to resolve many of those challenges that refugee teachers face related to accreditation, employment status, salaries. And as always, the politics, national and local, big P, small p, and the incentives for all concerned will need to be heard, carefully listened to and understood and interpreted for us to make the shifts that full inclusion for those children and young people can ultimately bring in terms of benefits for their present well-being and their future hope. So we welcome the UNICEF UNHCR blueprint for joint action on refugees, which spans not just education, but WASH and child protection. We know it's not just about what happens in the classroom. It's not just about the pedagogy. It's an excellent initiative that provides a platform for advocacy and support for refugee teachers. And education never stands in isolation. Keeping children safe in refugee settings has to remain a very, very high priority. Children and young people cannot learn unless they feel safe. And given Becky's last comment, teachers can't teach unless they feel safe. We have a Syrian refugee advisor here with us today, not in the room. She's doing something else at the moment, Hala, and for whom education provided a direct route out of total deprivation. She crossed the border from Syria to Turkey And the last 2 suitcases that she and her family had with them, with their precious belongings for their future, were taken from them by the immigration people or the security guards, whoever it was. They took them and they crossed with the clothes they stood in. And what she said to us, though, was that they could not take the education out of her that she had already received. And as one of the refugee teachers was speaking in an earlier session, some of you may have been there, she was talking about the pride she felt in providing education to her community. Hala whispered to me, this is critical for us. We have to be able to pay back for what we have received as refugees. It's essential for us to feel okay. And that was a powerful moment for me. I've never been a refugee. I'm acutely aware anybody can end up as a refugee. Things can turn on a pinhead, but that was an insight I wouldn't have known about. So teachers too often don't get a mention. We focus on the children, we focus on the young people, but no quality education can succeed without them. I know AI will improve, and thank you for that. I haven't been that close to losing it entirely through the giggles in a long time. I do understand Spanish, but that was hilarious. It's got some way to go. But we will never be able to rely on EdTech, even when it improves, to replace the human intelligence, particularly that emotional intelligence that children and young people need when their mental health can be so damaged from the trauma they've experienced. And I was a teacher for 17 years before I moved into being a very boring civil servant, so I feel allowed to say that. Refugee teachers are a hugely undervalued resource who can change perceptions of refugees as well as children's lives, and integrating them into the host country national systems will be central to the success of integrating refugee children. But they will need training, salaries and recognition, and they will need lunch. Can you imagine doing what they're doing with all the trauma they faced and all their concerns, and they can't get lunch? They too are refugees and they deserve our support, and I very much hope that we will all be making this a priority. Thank you very much, and thank you, Moira.
So, thank you very much for this. The QR code is there if you would like the publication to download. There are also physical copies available as you leave the room. And what I think is extremely important at this particular moment is the number of words about teachers in the 2019 Global Refugee Forum and the number of words about teachers in the 2023 Global Refugee Forum. There are more, but it's not substantially more words. The feeling, the vibe, the priority that is being given to teachers in this forum, as in so many other fora, whether it was the Transforming Education Summit, whether it was the UN Secretary General putting teachers at the forefront of all of the SDG agenda, that is substantially and substantively different. And we can't ignore the fact that we have this shift. Nor can we ignore the fact that lunch is not bought with vibes. Nor can we ignore the fact that salaries are not paid with vibes, nor the qualification frameworks, nor the equivalencies, nor protection, nor safety, nor well-being for sure. So this, yes, there's a publication here and we are very proud of it and we're very grateful to all of the work that went into this, Chris for coordinating it and all of the authors who worked so hard to make this happen. And for this event, all of the work that went into this event from the entire NORRAG team, Camille, Simone at the back, Jackie, Georgia here as well. And it can't stop here because we can't be satisfied with just feeling like the teachers are now at the forefront of the agenda. It really is about then saying, what are we going to do to make sure that we are taking this forward and we are going to be part of the solution? And as Martina said, the NORRAG network is a multi-stakeholder network. Every single sector in society has a role to play in this, whether it is leading it or supporting it, but all of us listening to refugees, listening to refugee children, listening to refugee teachers, and listening to the experts who know, and an awful lot of them are in the Global South. So thank you all very much for your attention, and we very much look forward to sending you the link to the event highlights of this. We also have another event coming up in January on foundational learning, breaking the gridlock currently between literacy and numeracy alone in opposition to everything else, and saying that's actually a false debate. Let's do it better. And also to invite those of you for whom this is relevant to join the network of the South Also Knows. If you're not from the Global South yourself and don't identify as it, at least take the message and make sure that the people you do know who are can join the network, and take the message that really the South does also know, and we need to be listening very, very hard. And I'm very, very happy to invite you all to pick up your copy of the publication as you leave the room. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Thank you to all of the people online who have joined us. We had nearly 400 registrations, so we're very happy with this, and thank you most of all. Thank you.